This is DaviD TaL. This is the Balagan Connection. This is going to be an update about what's going on in Israel and around Israel. This update's going to be a little bit longer, which is why I put a list of subjects in the comments below, and you can jump directly to any subject that wants to connect. We'll be talking about the war in Gaza. We'll be talking about the hostages. We'll talk about the negotiation and the hostages, the conflict in Israel that's connected to that. We'll talk about the day after in Gaza, and we'll talk about what's going on in the other arenas around. We'll talk about Iran. We'll talk about the court case in Holland and the anti-Semitism. We'll talk about the hatred and anti-Semitism in the United States, how this connects to your election, and we'll talk about the church. And in the end, we'll talk about what you need to do. So stay with us and let's go in. The war in Gaza is fierce. It's still going on. Israel has turned up the pressure, mostly in the southern part of the Gaza, in an area called Khan Yunis. Khan Yunis is the main center of the Hamas in Gaza, and literally they're going house to house, tunnel to tunnel, and trying to find the leadership of the Hamas and to finish the fighting in Hamas. According to Israel, at least 1,000 of the terrorists, not the civilians, the terrorists, have been killed in Khan Yunis. But I'm sorry to say that we're also losing quite a few of our soldiers. A couple hundred soldiers have been lost in this terrible fight. A word about that. This is very, very deep in our country, because in Israel, everybody is a soldier. Everybody knows somebody. I know people who are in the fighting right now. I know men who have fallen. Another thing about Israel's military is that a lot of the soldiers are reservists, meaning like your National Guard, which means you finish your 3 years of regular army service, you get put in a reserve unit, and you spend another 30 years I spent in a reserve unit inside a unit itself. And these are the men that are fighting, and some of them, I'm sorry to say, are fallen in battle inside Gaza itself. And it's a deep connection to everything we are. Then the hostages that are still in there, 136 hostages are still unaccounted for, though we do think that at least 28, 29 of them have already been killed in captivity. This is something that is tearing Israel apart. And that connects to the discussion that's going on in Israel about stopping everything and reaching an agreement with Hamas and releasing all the hostages, giving them whatever they want, and not stopping the war until we finish off Hamas. And these two elements are interwoven inside Israel, and there's a very deep and very profound discussion going on right now. On one hand, you can't say anything to the families of the hostages. I mean, think how you would feel if it was your family or your son or your daughter in Gaza. On the other hand, some of the soldiers are coming out and says, don't stop us. We need to finish off Hamas, because if we don't finish off Hamas, this is only something that's going to repeat itself. And that is a deep problem, or deep conflict that we're discussing right now. As you probably heard, the negotiations for some kind of an arrangement are on the table, taking place in Qatar as we speak. And what Israel has put on the table in the negotiation was, we'll give you a longer term ceasefire in return for all the hostages. Bring all the hostages out. And they're talking about some kind of final arrangement. Israel said if the Hamas picks up and leaves Gaza and returns all the hostages, we can finish this now. And that's something that the world needs to know. Israel is saying, return the hostages, have Hamas leave Gaza so they will not ever be a threat against us, and we can start rebuilding the Gaza Strip. But the world doesn't accept that, and I think that even Qatar is saying very clearly that the Hamas will never accept them leaving Gaza. So it looks like this is going to be a conflict that's going to take a little while longer. And now it's a question of what's going to happen in Gaza after the Hamas is over. Israel doesn't want to control Gaza. We don't want to stay in control, but we realize that if we don't control Gaza, this might actually happen again, and that's inconceivable to Israelis. Nobody's willing to accept that. So there's a lot of negotiation, a lot of movement. The United States, the other powers are trying to reach some kind of arrangement where maybe the PLO or the Palestinian Authority will move into Gaza. Maybe an international Arab kind of conglomerate will kind of move into Gaza. Maybe some kind of arrangements. Everybody's looking for an arrangement to stay in Gaza or to control Gaza on the day after. That is still part of the negotiation. And I'm sorry to say that the Israeli government hasn't come out with a definitive plan about what's going to happen. And that's another part of the issue. In the meantime, our enemies around us, okay, are still clashing their swords. Uh, and let's go quickly over the different aspects. One of the things I want to stress, very, very interesting, is that the Israeli Arabs, meaning the Arab Muslims living inside Israel, have been very quiet. We haven't seen any demonstrations. We've gotten full-fledged support from the Arab Muslims that live in Israel. In the West Bank, Hamas has tried to raise its head, and Israel is fighting, the security forces are fighting against the Hamas representatives in the West Bank, but there have not been very many, there's not been very strong clashes in the West Bank between the Palestinians living in the West Bank and the Israeli forces. So the West Bank is quiet, actually, very interesting and maybe even surprisingly. In the north, the Hezbollah has turned up the fire, but is dancing a very weird dance of firing a couple of rockets, shooting a couple of anti-tank missiles, but being very, very careful to stay away from triggering Israel into a full-fledged response. And that is an in-between situation. There's growing resentment inside Lebanon against the Hezbollah. Remember, the Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy. They're not really Lebanese. They're Iranian armed military elements and how do you say, Shiite elements inside Lebanon. And the Lebanese people are kind of tired of the Hezbollah using Lebanon as a base to attack Israel. And there's a growing resentment inside Lebanon against Nasrallah, who is the head of the Hezbollah, and against the Hezbollah itself. Iran is still pushing arms, is still pushing the Hezbollah to stay relative, but we kind of really realize that Hezbollah is trying to keep it on a certain level. We call it brinkmanship. They're kind of staying on the brink, but here's the problem. Knowing what we know what happened in Gaza, we cannot allow the threat of the Hezbollah to sit on our northern border much further. So at some point, Israel might have to make a decision, and actually we will trigger the oncoming struggle that's going to happen on the northern border with Israel. On the other hand, Syria, different elements are playing. Syria is a fallen apart country. There's a lot of different elements in Syria, including ISIS, including the Russians, including the Shiites, including all kinds of things, and it's been used as a base. Elements of Hamas have been using Syria as a base to fire against Israel. Israel has retaliated, and so far there's another war that's going on in Syria between the main instigator of what's going on and all the different players. In Yemen, the Houthis have actually tried to press the button, and I think finally the West, as in the United States and Britain and other Western forces, have decided to fire back at the Houthi rebels and actually impeding or disrupting, I think, something like 15% of the world's sea traffic that is going through the Bab el-Mandeb. The United States, the world has realized that you cannot appease this. And here's the thing. The story with the Houthis is relevant because it is another illustration of what the West has to understand after what happened with Hamas, with the Houthis, that we are in a situation today where you don't need a big army to poke a major power. In the past, if you wanted to take on the United States, you had to create an army, you had to create a navy, you had to create an air force. Today, it looks like everybody with an AK-47, a missile, and a drone can actually take on the world. And he will be applauded for it. They will be applauded. The Houthis are receiving huge amounts of support from the Arab world because they're standing up to the United States. And here's the thing. If the United States of America isn't willing to use its power and its military might, if the Western world is not willing to use its power and its military might in order to make it clear that even though you can, you should not fire rockets at ships, okay, that situation is not going to be over. And in the background of all of this is Iran, who is sitting in the back and playing with the strings, pulling the Houthis, pulling the Hezbollah, pulling this, pulling that. And what most of the Western world doesn't understand, that Iran is actually at war with the West. Iran is at war with everything that we hold dear. Iran is at war with the whole dynamic, the whole, well, I'm going to call it Western civilization slash Judeo-Christian creed. That's their war. The problem is they're not strong enough. They're not willing to come out and fight. And again, they're using the Houthis, they're using the Hamas, they're using the Hezbollah in a proxy war. But let's make this clear. This is a war against the United States. And if the United States does not wake up to the fact that this is a war that is being fought against them, then we are in a serious problem. Which brings us to something that I think is amazing, that is, well, not amazing, something that is scary that is happening in the United States. And what's happening is, I'm sitting in Los Angeles today, and I'm seeing the hatred that is being perpetrated against Israel. I mean, the mind is blown away by the fact that if anybody else had this done to them, I mean, if drug lords came over from Tijuana into San Diego and kidnapped 250 people and raped and murdered as many as they could on the way, the world would be up in arms. I mean, if the Russians did that in Ukraine, the world would be up in arms. I mean, if anybody else pulled off an attack like this, it would be devastating. But the world is quiet. And here's the thing. Israel is being taken to court by South Africa, no less, okay, and accused of war crimes, where the only reaction or the only thing that the world court has to deal with is what Israel is doing now to defend itself, and not what happened originally to start this off. Let me remind everybody, on the 6th of October, there was a ceasefire. On the 6th of October, everything was quiet. It is not Israel that started this off, but we will have to finish this. But the absurdity that if it's Jews that are being attacked, that's acceptable. But if the Jews fire back, that is not acceptable. That is part of the anti-Semitism that we're seeing in the world itself. And I'm even seeing it here in the United States. And what's happening is, from a political point of view, it's becoming problematic to support the morals and the rationality of a nation defending itself. And this is going to play into your elections. And I'm seeing more and more of the progressive, woke left that is standing with the other side, that is standing, it's turned Israel into an imperial colonial nation, which is so ludicrous. And that's going to be, I think, one of the pivotal aspects of the coming election that we're going to be talking about. And you and I both know who we need to see in the White House and who needs to be in control of what's going to happen for the next 4 years. Which brings me to the last aspect. One of the things that I am finding fascinating is the fact that the church, in many cases, is quiet about what's happening. And like other subjects that are deeply biblical and deeply ingrained in our way of life, and deeply representative of how much Christianity is part of American culture, like other subjects, the church is being relatively silent about what's going on in Israel, and about what's going on with anti-Semitism, about what's going on with Jew hatred, about what's going on all over the world. And I find that very, very profound, that now, at all times, when the feeling is that we are getting close to Revelation time events, now the church is quiet about what's happening to God's chosen people. And I can't help making that connection here. It's really important for people to listen to this. And maybe this is something that I need to talk to you about. because we need to put Israel back on center stage. We need to put Israel back on center stage from a political point of view, but mostly we need to put Israel back on center stage from a spiritual point of view. Let your spiritual leaders, and if you are a spiritual leader, remember, bring Israel back into the discussion. Bring Israel back into what's going on. This is something that we need to do now. We need to pray for Israel. It's got to be public. It's got to be from the pulpits of the churches. People have to connect to Israel, learn, find out, see what's going on. And more than anything, bring the story of Israel back to center stage so people who are Bible reading supporters of God's people have an idea of what's going on. So this was a pretty big, comprehensive overview. Like we say, we need your political support. Let your politicians know who to support and that you expect them to support Israel. Let the politicians who don't support Israel know that that is wrong. And you've got some really, really crazy wackos inside. Don't buy into the rhetoric and the propaganda from the other side. No, Israel is not committing genocide. No, Israel is not an apartheid. But again, whoever says that it is got an agenda on this. Okay? And more than anything, like we said before, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And just to finalize, I know who's going to win. You know who's going to win. But until then, pray for us. Pray for us in Israel. Pray for the people in Palestine, in the Gaza Strip who are being used as terrible pawns. And pray that all of this will be over soon. This is DaviD TaL. This is a Balagan Connection. Hope to see you soon.